Out of all of the headlines to emerge from last weekend's UFC 263, the one that holds perhaps the most legitimate competitive significance came in the form of Brandon Moreno's stunning third-round submission over the flyweight champion, Deiveson Figueredo, in the co-main event. We will of course be focusing in on Israel Adesanya's dominant victory over Marvin Vettori, as well as the showdown between Leon Edwards and Nate Diaz in future videos this week, so do keep an eye out for them. But I suppose for this video, after a short hiatus from UFC events, a period of time that saw far too much attention given to the circus matchup between Floyd Mayweather and Logan Paul, I did want to make sure that our first post-UFC 263 video was about one of the most impressive performances of the year so far. The flyweight division has truly blossomed into something very special in recent years. Now, those of you who frequently watch this channel will probably be aware of how angry it made me that the notion of cutting the 125-pound weight class was ever even discussed. Like most divisions that have a long-reigning dominant champion, Demetrious Johnson's run as the king of the 125-pounders brought with it this idea that we were watching a division that had nothing more to bring to the table. Sure, the weight class wasn't the most talent-rich in the UFC at the time, but it was a hell of a lot better than we thought. Such was the brilliance of its champion Mighty Mouse. And don't get me wrong, I understand that the flyweights weren't pulling in the numbers that warranted the money the UFC were paying for them. And though cutting the division seemed like a great idea at the time to those who didn't stop and actually think about what that would mean, even then we weren't to know just how soon after Johnson's departure the emergence of the likes of Henry Cejudo and Deiveson Figueredo would happen. Because these guys came up towards what could have been seen as the end of the 125-pound weight class in the UFC. And it wasn't just the sheer ridiculousness of cutting an entire division and its fighters that angered me. It was the flat-out rejection of any potentially great flyweight fighters that may come a year or 2 years, 5 years, even a decade down the line. The division was being destroyed out of some short-sighted decision to make scapegoats of an entire weight class, rather than to accept the greatness of Demetrious Johnson and the natural rhythm and flow of weight classes in this sport. Fighters were getting cut left, right and center at this point, until the division's rankings had less than 15 names to fill it, numbering around 12 or 13 I think, making it an awkward sight on the UFC's official website. And look, I know the UFC attempted to inject some life into the division a year before, through the creation of a season of The Ultimate Fighter back in 2016, a desperate attempt designed purely to find a fresh new challenger to Demetrious Johnson's belt. And it was a good idea, and though the eventual winner Tim Elliott fell short after giving the champ a nervy opening round, I suppose I want to jump off on a tangent at this point in the video, to speak about that season of The Ultimate Fighter and a series of events that in many ways mirror the trajectory and the renewed vitality of the flyweight division since that shaky period. Because on that season of Tough, in a time that could well have seen the entire weight class axed, within that opening episode, something unusual was about to happen. In a 16-man seeding that included the likes of Tim Elliott, Kai Kara France and Alexander Pantoja, the last man to be selected by the team captains, as if it was some form of playground pickup basketball, would eventually outgrow the others and become the greatest of the lot. The 16th seed, Brandon Moreno, was on paper the worst fighter in the tournament, or at least that's how it appeared. 22 years old and with an 11-3 record, he, as the lowest rated of the lot, was forced to take on the number 1 seed, Alexander Pantoja, in what should have been a formality, a stepping stone for one of the show's betting favourites to progress into the next round. That fight was the first to air on the show that season if memory serves, and at the time, though I was a budding fan of MMA, I too believed that we were about to watch number 16 get fed to the top seed, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I promise you that I'm not overstating this. On that very episode, I was given a lesson in underestimating fighters that I never did forget. Seriously, Brandon Moreno went in there and put it on Pantoja in a way that shouldn't have made sense. Again, I wasn't as experienced with this sport at that point in time as I am now, but I was genuinely shocked during that first round at how game Moreno was in there, how unperturbed he was by his billing as the underdog. And though Pantoja mixed it up in the second round through his wrestling and top control before eventually taking the fight on the scorecards, I had seen enough to at the very least remember the name of this gutsy young talent, even if he was the first fighter to be eliminated from that season. To those of you who don't know, Tim Elliott would of course go on to win the show, although several fighters from the season would also sign for the UFC. And though time has proven Kara France, Pantoja, Elliott and Matt Schnell to be UFC caliber athletes, none of them managed an opening run of form quite like Moreno when they all received their UFC contracts post-Tough. Indeed, Kara France, like Moreno, would go 3-0 before losing his first UFC contest, which was coincidentally against Moreno. But to see the 16th seeded fighter pulling away from all others with a comparatively more impressive run of form, 3-0 over stiff competition with 2 finishes. Yeah, he made a fan of me. And I promise you, I'm not jumping on this bandwagon now. I never thought he would be champion, honestly. But there was just something so satisfying to me about watching this guy defying the limitations of the box that he'd been placed in on that opening episode of Tough. So yeah, every time his name would pop up or whenever I'd catch a fight of his, a small part of me would be like, yeah, you go prove them wrong, Brandon Moreno. I know exactly where you've come from. But then, at that point in time, something even more interesting happened. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. Before leaving a comment to let YouTube's algorithms know that we are fast becoming one of the best MMA channels on the platform. After a pair of decision defeats to Sergio Pettis and Alexander Pantoja once again, Moreno, as part of the massive exodus of flyweights that seemed to signal the division's incoming collapse, was cut from the promotion, leaving the UFC at the age of 24 with a 3-2 record inside the octagon. He would not fight for another year, returning in June of 2019 with a 4th round TKO of the LFA flyweight champion, Michael Perez, to win himself what was then his 2nd regional championship belt. But as we all know, in the meantime, the 125-pound division was in the process of being saved. Henry Cejudo had finally dethroned Demetrius Johnson before defending his belt with a stunning sub-minute TKO of TJ Dillashaw. All of a sudden, people were slowly beginning to find flyweight interesting again, and the UFC, being the reactive, ever-changing force that they are, decided that perhaps forever cutting off their supply of all future flyweight talents wasn't the best idea after all. Who'da thunk it? Anyway, after Dana and co had finally come to their senses, signing the young and clearly talented Brandon Moreno back into their flyweight roster was a no-brainer. And so, after a 15-month period away from the top flight, Moreno was once again back in the UFC, and with his division's status now seemingly in a much safer position, he went to work, following on from what was a tightly fought draw with the highly touted and still unbeaten Askar Askarov, with back-to-back-to-back wins that saw him best Kai Kara France, Yusir Formiga, and Brandon Royval to establish himself as the top contender to the newly crowned Deiveson Figueredo's title. You all know the story from there. Him and the champion engaged in an instant classic at UFC 256, before Moreno returned a much improved fighter to beat the brakes off him in the rematch. And yeah, overall it was one hell of a performance. If their first fight proved how fitting he was to carry the torch in that long line of tough, gritty Mexican fighters we know best from boxing, the improvements he showed in the rematch established him as the best flyweight fighter in the world today. It was a wonderful effort from this blossoming talent, one that even the most diehard of Figueredo fans would be hard-pressed to ignore. And look, I do think that Deiveson's weight cut finally got the best of him, to at least some extent. There did look to be some differences in his confidence, his ability to take a shot, and though I can sit here and speculate further, what I can say with complete certainty is that Brandon Moreno has grown considerably between fights. And I just think that his story, his 16th place seed and early exit from The Ultimate Fighter, the manner in which he slowly grew to outperform all of his fellow contestants, the way he rebounded after being cut from the UFC, using that setback to begin a 7-fight unbeaten streak, a streak that would eventually see him become the first Mexican-born UFC champion in the history of the sport. I can't help but be moved by it all. The dude seems like he's the nicest guy on the roster, but he's a ferocious fighter, a fighter's fighter, one who has been forced to deal with great adversity in his rise. And yeah, I think that a rematch with Askar Askarov will be the perfect test of his long-term viability as a champion within this stacked weight class. Because like it or not, that's exactly how flyweight is shaping up these days. I'm honestly just happy to be sitting here 2 or 3 years removed from that frankly ridiculous saga, speaking to you about the greatness of a UFC flyweight champion. In the wake of the dominance of Demetrius Johnson, the flyweight division was at first saved by Henry Cejudo. Then, through the efforts of Figueredo, of Askarov, of Benavidez, of Royval, of Pantoja, of Perez, of Kara France and the rest of them, it has slowly found its way back into the hearts of the masses. But make no mistake, this is now the Brandon Moreno era. He's been through a lot to get that golden belt. I suppose all that's left to figure out now is how long he can keep it. But what do you think about this new flyweight champion? And do you think that he has the potential to rule this division for a long time? Do let us know in the comments section below. We always love to hear from you guys. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you can stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. Thank you for watching.